You give them the time, trust, and top cover to do their jobs.
Yeah.
You remove impediments for them so that they can do their jobs. That, to me, is the true definition of leadership, is empowering and enabling your people to do the best that they can.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Jam session. Today's guest is Jon Macaskill, who is a retired Navy SEAL commander. Jon served in the military for almost 24 years, and he's here today to share his incredible journey with us. And you'll hear Jon talk about some of his experiences and the challenges that he had to overcome, and how he uses his experience and personal stories to help organizations today to overcome some of their day-to-day challenges, as well as helping so many other leaders through his podcast that he co-hosts called Men Talking Mindfulness Podcast. Jon, welcome to the Jam session.
Thanks, Rob. Great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
So am I. So are you ready to jam?
I'm ready.
And first and foremost, I do want to thank you for your service to our great nation, and I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks, man. I gotta tell you, I get that. Thanks for your service, and I appreciate it. I do, but I also got to tell you, it was an honor and a privilege of mine to serve right next to some of this country's best. If I had it to do all over again, I would do it all over again. So, thank you for the opportunity to serve.
No, again, I appreciate everything you've done for us, and definitely want to talk a little bit about your time and your journey, and definitely want to talk about your podcast, which we'll get to. But I think your journey will help provide a lot of the context behind that, the reasons why you've launched that podcast. So maybe
Sure.
we can just start with your journey. And
Of course,
I think you were in the graduated from the Naval Academy. Is that right?
I did.
And,
yes.
And then from there, did you knew you kind of wanted to try to get into the SEAL teams, or how that happen?
I think I knew back in high school, somewhere probably like my junior year or so, I decided that I wanted to be in special operations in some capacity. I was running track and cross country as a young guy, and I was part of a small group. A lot of other guys were playing football or basketball or baseball, and I have nothing against those sports. I have tremendous respect for all those guys, but I just didn't have the hand-eye coordination to play the ball sport. So I ran track and cross country, and it was a small team, but we were very successful. And so I decided that when I left high school, I wanted to be part of a small team that was like a brotherhood, doing something that they were very good at and they were very successful at. And special operations fit that. And then growing up, I used to spend the summers down on the Gulf Coast and spend some time in the water. And I knew that I wanted to do some type of special operations in or around the water. And so the Navy kind of bubbled to the surface, and no pun intended there, but right. they bubbled to the top of the list, and the Navy SEALs specifically. So I thought about going into the SEALs out of high school. I kind of envisioned myself going from high school to the Naval Academy, and then going from the Naval Academy into the SEALs. I applied to get into the Naval Academy out of high school and actually got denied first off. And so I thought, well, my ultimate dream is to become a SEAL, whether it's going through the Naval Academy or not. So I decided to enlisted in the Navy, and then got picked up from the enlisted ranks to go into the Naval Academy. Oh. And so I graduated in the class of 2001 and got selected out of that group. I
got to stop you there. I was kind of, as you were talking about high school, and you were talking about, you said you kind of didn't have the hand-eye coordination. I just kind of have to laugh at that, as here you go off and then become a SEAL team, join SEALs, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure you have to have some pretty good hand-eye coordination for that.
Decent. I mean, you got to do the obstacle course and be able to shoot and move and communicate. Yeah. So that there was some level of coordination there, but I'm still not a great ball sport guy.
Okay.
But I've gotten better in my seasoned years, if you will. I can ski now. I can water ski. I can do things that I wasn't able to do when I was younger. But I think some of that hand-eye coordination was actually developed through the time in the SEAL teams and through training. Yeah. So it's kind of ironic there, but
right.
Yeah. I went on, served in the SEAL teams from from 2003-ish until just last year. I retired in August of 2020. Wow. And during that time, I had, had some ups and downs, but looking back on it, for the most part, it was more ups than downs. So I enjoyed it.
Wow. I can't believe I didn't realize you had that many years operating.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Well, operating is a relative term. I spent the latter part of my career behind a computer. So if operating a keyboard and a mouse, if that's part of it, I was not tactical my whole time. There's a lot of other guys who are, and they are just unbelievable heroes in my eyes. And I definitely attribute where we are as a country to men and women like that who are doing the heavy lifting on the battlefield, on and off the battlefield. So,
and maybe you can just help share, because I myself and just don't know the differences in terms of, operators, or because you were a Navy SEAL commander, right? And so maybe you can just share a little bit about what specifically your role.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, my role changed over the years as I kind of rose through the ranks. The analogy that I always try to use is, the enlisted men on a SEAL team are kind of like the players on a football field. They're out there doing the work, doing the real work, getting the job done. And and obviously this analogy is not perfect. There's exceptions and to the rules, but the officers are kind of like the offensive coaches, defensive coaches. And then as you rise up through the ranks on the officer side, you move from offensive coordinator to offensive lead coach to head coach, and then eventually up to the owner, right? So they're not down there on the battlefield, quote unquote, doing the work. Now, that said, there's plenty of officers who do get into firefights, who are on the battlefield, and myself included. As a junior officer, I was out there, but the senior enlisted men on the SEAL teams are the ones who are doing the real leadership on the battlefield. And they're not only leading the other men, but they're the ones who I lean on as an officer, as a junior officer. I turn to my chief, my senior chief, my master chief, and I ask them, I lean on them for their advice, their experience, their sage, the ones who've been there and done that. So you lean on them a lot.
Well, I'm kind of laughing because the way you just explained that in reality to the corporate world isn't that far off, leaning on, your more experienced people on the ground for advice and guidance.
Right.
Similar in some respects.
Yeah. Well, hopefully. And I think that's one of the reasons so many military leaders do well in corporate America is that they know off the bat, they don't know it all. And they're going to have to ask questions. And that's where I think a true leader distinguishes him or herself, is they're willing to admit that they don't know it all. They don't want to be the smartest person in the room. They want to learn from those around them, and they want to be servant leaders, right? That's the job. That's the job of a leader, is to be a servant leader, is to empower those that are under you, quote unquote, in an organization to be the best that they can, that they can be. You give them the time, trust, and top cover to do their jobs. Yeah. You remove impediments for them so that they can do their jobs. That, to me, is the true definition of leadership, is empowering and enabling your people to do the best that they can. So
completely agree. And again, you currently now work with organizations based on your experience, except that, your approach to that a little bit different, right? Particularly based on some of your experience, which I think is important, to share that.
It is a lot different than your typical leadership consultant or management consultant. Yep. I try to call myself an organizational cultural consultant. So I come in and I assess, much like any other management and leadership consultant, I assess what the organization is doing, but then I see what the emotional intelligence is of the leaders. The emotional intelligence is of the managers. The emotional intelligence is of the organization as a whole, how they're bonding, what they're doing together to form a team, to form a culture that is one of high performance, that is one that is working towards the same goal, that is one that is we're hiring people, we're making sure we're hiring people that are living and breathing the same ideals and values of the organization. If you hire people just to hire people, you're eventually going to set yourself up for failure. So that's what I do is I come in and I look at it through a different optic than most leadership and management consultants do, with kind of an eye for how to improve the culture, how to improve the gelling of the team together, how they come together, and then how to work towards a common goal. I don't look at finances. I don't look at any of that.
Right.
That will all come as a byproduct. The primary reason, the primary goal of me coming into an organization is to help them improve their culture, which again, the byproduct will be improving their bottom line.
Sure. Yeah. And let me ask you this, because you work with a lot of, organizations. From your perspective, what do you come across as that you see as some of the biggest challenges within organizations?
I think there's two things, and they're kind of intertwined. One is pride, pride of some of the leaders that they think that they know it all, and they think that their way is the only way. And sometimes they're too proud to listen to input from those who may be junior in their organization, but they may be more seasoned. They may have more experience, but they may be junior as far as rank is concerned.
Yeah.
So as a leader in an organization, I think putting pride aside and asking questions, having that beginner's mindset, and coming back to what I mentioned before, not wanting to be the smartest person in the room. If you put your pride aside, be vulnerable. One, that allows you to learn from your people, and two, it allows them to see you as a human being rather than just a position, so that they're more likely to actually want to work for you. And the other one is toxicity. There's just so much toxicity these days, whether it's because of personality or because of religious or political views. There's some things that just do not belong in a workspace. And if you can work to remove those, then you can help to remove the toxicity, whether it's talking about religion, whether it's talking about politics, or whether it's just some backbiting, backstabbing that can happen. If you have maybe an organization that has different departments and divisions, a lot of the time there can be cliques that form in and around those departments, or around a particular mission or whatever that you're working towards. I like to get those departments, divisions to work together, and so that you have some cross-functional ideas of what the other department does, and then also some respect and admiration for the other departments and the other people. So you can cut some of that toxicity out if you actually start doing, as trivial as they may seem, if you actually start doing some team building exercises, some team building retreats, even days that maybe get away as an organization, and you start to see people and see them as people rather than just others within the organization. That can help with that toxicity. But pride and toxicity, as far as I'm concerned, are the two big hurdles that need to be overcome.
Which really, stems from the individual leaders that are there to help mitigate that, right? Help set the tone.
Absolutely. Yes. If the senior leaders in an organization are themselves toxic, or are themselves being overly prideful, that will trickle down and sink a very successful organization faster than anything else.
Yeah. And you talk about, I know we talked the other day, you kind of shared with me, at least your philosophy around, some common themes that make up a great team or great leaders. I think there's four that you kind of talk through with me.
Yeah. As far as what I've seen in my time in the SEAL teams and in the organizations that I've worked with, there's four attributes that I feel really lend to successful leaders and successful teams. And that's preparedness, resilience, grit, and compassion. And so preparedness is being able to plan for the foreseen and unforeseen. The resilience is bouncing back once you get knocked down, because you're going to get knocked down. The grit is setting goals and then working to achieve those goals. And then compassion is understanding what your people need and what you personally need. So having some self-compassion, understanding what your people need and what you need in order to succeed. And then it comes back to that servant leadership. If you understand what your people need, then you're able to give them that. Once they have that, they're going to do anything for you. So those are the 4 attributes that I feel are common amongst very successful teams and successful leaders. And I know I'm going to get some pushback on this. Some people are going to say, well, what about courage, authenticity, integrity, honesty? I feel that if you are prepared, if you are resilient, if you are gritty, and if you have compassion, all those other leadership attributes fall into those 4 buckets, and you're going to have them. If you don't, then there's going to be a problem.
Yeah, I actually would agree with that. I think the one that kind of stands out to me as well is one that doesn't get talked about enough is the compassion piece. Maybe that gets back to the leaders who think they're always right or aren't willing to maybe listen to some of their employees or ask some of the questions they should be asking. But the compassion piece, I think, is an important one. I mean, leaders really, it's sad because if leaders were a little bit more vulnerable, it goes such a long way.
Absolutely, it does.
Right?
Yeah, 100%. The vulnerability that leads to the compassion. I think if you're vulnerable enough to express when you're maybe you don't know everything, or if you're vulnerable enough to know that you have a weakness and actually express that, that doesn't mean that you're weak. That just means that you have a weakness. By expressing that vulnerability, you can, and quote unquote weakness, you can lean on somebody else who has that as a strength. And then as a team, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Yeah. So as a leader, you need to know who has different attributes as strengths, and you need to know your own weaknesses so that you can lean on those other people in the organization. Or if you don't have them in your organization, then you can hire the people that have them. And I know we spoke last week, we talked about, hiring for soft skills, not for the hard skills, hiring for people who are going to build a team up, that are going to support and promote a team, rather than hiring because somebody has the best PowerPoint or coding skills, or you can definitely teach hard skills. I mean, obviously that you're not going to hire someone as a surgeon and then teach them on the job to be a surgeon. Right. But in an organization as a whole, you can teach some hard skills. You don't necessarily have to hire exclusively for the hard skills. Look for the soft skills, look for the leaders, look for the people who are going to motivate and inspire and gel the team together. And when you can do that, you can develop those high performing teams.
Yeah. So a couple of things you said that I think is so spot on. First of all, those of us out there that, because I have a lot of emerging leaders who are either new to managing that listen in, and I get it. You don't want to show that you may not know something, but I can tell you that you're just putting way too much pressure on you. Because as you said, John, we don't have all the answers, right? I mean, that's right. And quite honestly, the ones who are vulnerable, it's not a sign of weakness, as you talked about, right? They're the ones that actually are confident enough to admit it. If you think about
absolutely.
it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, exactly. Like Brene Brown, right? She talks about how she sits on an airplane and somebody asks her what she does. And she says, well, I talk about vulnerability and strength, or vulnerability and courage. And the one person says, oh, 2 different sides of the spectrum. And, that's not at all the case. Vulnerability is on the exact same side. Vulnerability is a strength. It takes a lot. We talk on our Men Talking Mindfulness podcast, which I know we'll get into later, but we talk about how fear keeps us from being vulnerable. Fear of what we may be seen as, who we may be seen as. We may be seen as weak. We may be seen as somebody who doesn't have it all together. That fear is keeping us from being vulnerable. And if we're not overcoming that fear, then that is the weakness. That's the weakness. It's not the vulnerability. It's not the expressing that you have a weakness in and of itself. It's the fear of showing that weakness. And that if you don't show that weakness, and if you don't ask those questions, if you don't admit that you don't have all the answers, the worst that can happen is somebody can die, right? Like our example in military. Yeah. If you go in and you say, hey, I've got it all together, I've got all the answers, you don't ask questions, you go on the battlefield and you're not prepared, but you've been putting on this mask of preparedness, then people die. Yeah. And that's obviously not something that we want, whether that's on the battlefield or whether it's in a corporate team or whether it's in a school or whatever. We don't want people to get hurt. We don't want people to die. And that's why you have to admit that you have a weakness. That's why you have to admit that you don't have all the answers. You have to be vulnerable. That is a strength.
That's right. 100% agreed. And the second thing that you talked about, right, is finding, it's not always about the hard skills, right? And this is hard too, particularly when you're new to managing, in terms of hiring and building out a team. Sometimes it's more important to find the right people who complete the team. And it may have nothing to do with the hard skills.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, you can bring the, sports analogies, right? You can have a basketball team that is decent and bring this superstar player that has all the hard skills, that can do everything on the court, but doesn't bring that team together. You're not going to have a championship team. You won't. Yeah. Whereas you go back to the Bulls of the 90s, the double three-peat, right? You had a team that gelled together and they were able to do the amazing things that they did because they gelled together. Sure, they had Michael Jordan. Don't get me wrong. Michael Jordan's a phenomenal player. And I've always been a huge fan of Michael Jordan, but they also had a team. And if you can do that, if you can bring on somebody that may not have all the hard skills, but they're able to bring the team together, working towards that common goal, then that's when you're going to do better. That's what you should be hiring for. And the hiring process should take longer than it does in a lot of organizations. A lot of the time, there's a rush to hire because an organization feels understaffed. And that in that rush to hire, they don't pay attention to a person's ideals and values, and whether that person's ideals and values are in line with the organization's ideals and values. They don't pay attention to what soft skills the person is bringing, and they bring that person in and they could be toxic. They could not have the same ideals and values. And now they end up firing that person. And then there's just a higher turnaround. The other side is that we're too slow to fire because we were like, okay, well, we can develop this person. We can make them who we want them to be. We can make them who we thought they were. That's the problem, is a lot of time we think we can make them who we thought they were. They're not going to change. They're not going to change fast enough. So you've got to be slow to hire and fast to fire. And I know that sounds crass, but if you're really working towards building a high-performing team, a high-performing organization, you have to cut out the cancers as quickly as you can. Anyone that is coming in that is going to be detrimental towards an organization reaching its goals, that is going to be toxic in the culture, you got to cut them out. Otherwise, you're going to be on a sinking ship.
What's interesting is as you're talking, reminding me, a lot of the coaching I do with some leaders and executives, and some of the challenges they're having are 99% of the time specific to employees that have behavioral challenges, not the right fit. They're just, whatever the case may be, toxic. And in many cases, they were never, they inherited the employee. So because they were never coached properly or dealt with, to your point, right? Or there was, they look great on paper. The pressure was there to hire and no thought was put into the fit side of it.
Right.
And then it just lingers on and they kick the can down the road.
Yeah. Or they kick the can down the road. Hey, let somebody else fire them. Yeah. Let somebody else hire on an employee that's going to come in here and change the organization. Yeah. It's dissonance, right? You just pushing it further and further down the road and hoping that things are going to get better. And as we say in the military, hope is not a course of action. You can't hope your way to success. You got to build your way to success. And that's by building a team that is high performing. That's the only way you're going to be able to do it. And in order to do that, you as a leader, you have to make some hard decisions. Some decisions that are going to be unpopular. Some decisions that may even be detrimental to the organization in the short run, but in the long run, it's going to be better for it. Just like coming back to potentially not hiring someone when there's a staffing shortfall. Hey, you don't want to hire the wrong person, so why rush to hire? Or potentially not firing. Hey, if you fire someone and now you're understaffed, sure, that may be at the short-term detriment to the organization, but in the long term, you fired that person because they were a detriment.
Yeah.
So yes, firing them may be a detriment, but it's not as much as keeping them on board.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, that kind of gets into a little bit of the preparedness, right? Like putting the time to really think through it and research it, and what are the steps you need to take.
Exactly. Know where you are, know what you need, so that you know how to get where you want to go. That's preparedness. If you don't know what you need, if you don't know where you are, then how are you ever going to get to success? If success is where you want to be, you can't get there if you don't know where you are and what you need. So
well said. Let's now shift gears a little bit, talk about your podcast. And if I have this accurate, I think the journey on what led you to the podcast goes back to some of your experience in the SEAL teams and having to overcome some challenges. Is that accurate?
Sure does. Yes, 100%. Yeah. So the podcast is Men Talking Mindfulness, and it's myself and my co-host Will Schneider. And the catch line, if you will, is what happens when a retired Navy SEAL commander gets together with a yoga and meditation teacher to talk about mindfulness. And the joke is that we don't know, because we literally every show we have something that happened that we had no idea was going to happen. But that all stems from, like you mentioned, something in my career, in my SEAL career, I battled with survivor guilt and stress and anxiety and depression. And quite honestly, just to be completely vulnerable right here with you, is I had some suicidal thoughts because I thought that I didn't belong to be here when I'd lost some friends who I really admired and I thought were amazing men, amazing people, amazing husbands, fathers. And I ended up going to see some counselors for those thoughts and the depression and the anxiety and the survivor's guilt. And eventually one of the counselors recommended mindfulness and meditation to me. And I laughed at him initially because I thought that I was above mindfulness and meditation. I thought that I was too tough for mindfulness and meditation. In my mind, that was kind of a soft practice, something for the weak of mind, something for hippies and monks, and not that I have anything against the hippies or monks, but just personally, I didn't see myself as one. Got convinced by this counselor that mindfulness was not for the weak, that it was for very high performing individuals, and that it helped to develop your discipline, your work ethic, your resilience and grit, which I talked about before as a key leadership attribute. And I thought, okay, well, if it can help with that, then I'll try it out. He basically sold it to me as a performance enhancing side of things rather than a therapeutic thing. And as a special operator, anything that can improve your performance, we kind of buy into. So I was sold. So I started practicing. And about 2 or 3 months later, I saw improvements in my performance. I saw improvements in my ability to handle stress and anxiety. And I also saw some of those things that I'd boxed up and put away for years, they bubbled to the surface, and I was able to actually see what I needed to talk through at talk counseling. Because I'd gone to talk counseling for a while, I just didn't know what I needed to talk through. But now I did. Now I knew what I had to address. And once I was able to identify it, name it, then I was able to tame it. So name it to tame it. Yeah. So fast forward, now I felt that mindfulness and meditation was something that I needed to share with as many people as would listen, because I attribute those to changing and quite literally saving my life. I was having these monthly phone calls with a buddy of mine about mindfulness and meditation. And then we thought, you know what, we should just take these phone calls, tape them, and put them on a podcast. And we didn't know how to do that. So we started with Instagram Live, just having some conversations and seeing who would listen. And, as any podcaster who starts, it was awful. The equipment wasn't professional. The audio was terrible.
Yes, I can relate. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Had Wi-Fi issues, everything. I mean, my wife and dog and kids all
Right.
came into the show at different times. Bottom line is we took that and eventually saw that people were paying attention to what it is we were doing. And that's basically the mission of Men Talking Mindfulness, is to break the stigma that surrounds these practices amongst men specifically. But we do have a varied audience of men, women, and everything between. And we really are enjoying where the show is going. But more importantly, we are enjoying seeing the positive effect that the show is having on people's lives. They weren't aware of these practices, or they thought that stigma, they kind of envisioned them as the same thing I had, the soft practices.
Yeah.
And when we bring on different guests with different backgrounds, or it's just me and Will kind of shooting the bull back and forth, it opens people's minds to these practices. Then they try it out, and then they see that it does in fact change their lives for the better. So that's what the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast is, and that's how it came to be, based off of a hardship or an adversity, an obstacle, whatever you want to call it, that I overcame via mindfulness.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I appreciate your willingness to share and your vulnerability. I think, your story in itself is inspirational. I'm glad to see where you came out of it and where you are today, and using it as a way to help so many others out there. I was so intrigued by the title of the podcast, and again, and a big shout out to Jeff Harris. He was on my podcast last year, and he was the one that kind of connected us together.
Yeah, just had dinner with Jeff 2 nights ago.
Oh, did you?
Last night. Yeah, I was losing track of time. It was last night.
Well, when he sent me the LinkedIn message and connected us, and I saw the title, I was like, that's an interesting title for a podcast. And I looked into it, and I was really intrigued by it. So I definitely recommend, for those of you out there, tune in and take a listen to it, because I think it's great in terms of what you're doing to help others out there.
I will say, tune into the more recent episodes. The audio is much better.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I go back to some of the ones that when we first started, I was like, oh, wow, did that really happen? Right. maybe one day I'll release the bloopers, and that might be even more entertaining.
There you go. There you go. That would be fun.
All right. So as we wrap up, how can anybody who wants to reach out to you, because I know you do work with organizations, and we will put your contact information in the show notes, but
great.
Any way anybody can what's the best way people can reach out to you?
Yeah. As far as the leadership or the organizational cultural consulting, just jonmacaskill.com. I do the consulting, or if you don't want to bring me in to do consulting, I do the keynote speaking about the same topics that we've discussed today. And then as far as the podcast, it's just Men Talking Mindfulness, and we're on YouTube, and we're on almost every podcast platform out there. So check that out. And then as far as social media, I'm on Instagram as Mindful Frogman, and LinkedIn just with my name. So check me out there. I'd love to connect. Mindful Frogman. I love that. That's awesome. Well, Jon, listen, I appreciate you coming on and sharing your stories and your sharing, the vulnerability piece of it. And again, I think you're a true inspiration, hero. And again, just want to thank you for your service and for coming on and sharing. Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you for having me. And thanks for doing what you're doing with leaders, because we need more strong leaders out there. And if they can learn the lessons from others who have gone before them, then more power to them. So thank you, Rob, for doing what you're doing. Thanks for having me. You bet. Thanks.